4:37 a.m. There was no announcement, no warning issued, no media vehicles waiting nearby. Only a narrow column of unmarked federal SUVs easing to a halt outside a plain, three-story municipal building, one that thousands of residents walked past daily without a second glance. The cold was severe. Exhaust clouds drifted thick and pale in the darkness. Doors opened without a sound. Nearly at the same instant, 46 federal personnel stepped onto the pavement. FBI, ICE. 2 medical officers assigned to the task force. Weapons held low, movements controlled, faces concealed. This was never intended as a visible arrest. It was a containment action. The objective was located on the top floor. Officially, Abdirahman Issa Noor, 54, was a regional political operator, a mediator, a connector, known for calm speeches at council sessions and public appearances beside donors and flags. His department oversaw community programs, municipal coordination, and interagency liaison work. To residents, he projected stability. To federal intelligence units, he represented something far more specific: a junction. Entry was immediate. A hydraulic ram slammed into the reinforced doorway. Once, again. On the third strike, the frame collapsed inward with a sharp metallic snap that echoed through the stairwell. Agents moved through the opening without pause. Lights snapped on. The room filled with controlled motion. At first glance, the office was textbook legitimate. Diplomas mounted neatly. Family portraits arranged with care. Certificates framed and aligned. Binders labeled with zoning references and budget cycles stacked precisely. An American flag stood in the corner, barely shifting as air rushed past. The inspection did not end there. Behind a full-height cabinet, agents discovered a concealed panel secured by industrial bolts. Forced open, it revealed a recessed compartment, absent from any architectural record. Inside, vacuum-sealed packages were arranged with methodical precision, brick after brick, wrapped, tagged, weighed. 300 kilograms of narcotics. This was not street-level supply, not fragmented stock. It was transport-ready inventory, marked with identifiers consistent with Somali organized crime distribution corridors spanning multiple states. Enough volume to saturate entire markets. Enough on its own to warrant a national mobilization. The room fell silent. Moments later, another call came from a nearby storage area. A room officially designated as records archiving contained palletized crates stacked nearly to the ceiling. Their exteriors bore worn labels identifying them as surplus equipment scheduled for disposal. Inside were weapons, not a handful, not dozens, nearly a full metric ton. Rifles broken down into components, machine gun parts, ammunition sealed against moisture, everything cataloged, packed, and staged for rapid assembly. The scale suggested planning, not hoarding. As weapons teams secured the crates, digital specialists turned to the main desk. Several phones lay open, screens glowing. Encrypted applications displayed unread alerts, timelines, coordinates, delivery intervals. No threats, no emotion, just logistics. Then they reached the paperwork. A steel safe embedded in the wall behind a framed certificate required a drilling unit. When opened, it contained no currency. It contained documents, clip-bound folders, USB drives marked in block lettering, internal memoranda stamped restricted, transit schematics, access rosters, handwritten scheduling notes. These were not criminal records. They were institutional, documents originating from municipal offices, regional agencies, and oversight bodies. Materials never intended to leave secure custody. Some detailed inspection procedures, others outlined emergency exemptions. Several carried signatures from officials, with no visible public link to Noor. That was the inflection point. What had begun as a corruption and trafficking investigation crossed into a different category entirely. The presence of sensitive administrative materials changed the scope. This was no longer simply about drugs or weapons. It was about access, about awareness, about who had chosen not to intervene. By 4:58 a.m., Noor was detained. There was no resistance, no statement. His hands rested steadily on the desk as agents read the charges. An office that had served for years as a public-facing institution now stood emptied to its frame, Drawers cleared, surfaces documented. Outside, the city slept on. Inside federal command networks, alerts multiplied. Serial numbers were checked. File headers cross-referenced. Shipment identifiers linked to stalled investigations that had gone unexplained for months. The alignments were too precise to dismiss. This had never been a hidden cache. Within federal command networks, alerts multiplied rapidly. Analysts began correlating serial identifiers, comparing file headers, and mapping shipment markers against investigations that had inexplicably stalled months earlier. The connections surfaced with unnerving clarity. This was never a concealed cache. It was an operational hub. As the final evidence container was sealed and logged, a concise instruction propagated outward from command. Broaden scope immediately. Secure the perimeter. Engage all secondary objectives. Whatever had been functioning from this office had already exceeded the scale of any single individual. By 5:11 a.m., activity at the municipal building settled into stillness. Evidence technicians worked without conversation. Phones were isolated, drives duplicated, documents imaged and packaged. Outside, traffic signals continued cycling through empty streets. To the waking city, nothing appeared unusual. Inside federal infrastructure, the situation was evolving fast. Initial confirmations arrived from document examination units. The materials recovered from the safe were authentic. Original pages, ink signatures, sequential foliation, internal routing stamps. Files that should have remained locked within controlled archives had been removed intact, without triggering internal safeguards. That reality pointed to collaboration, not burglary. What followed was not urgency. It was reconciliation. Investigators aligned timelines, authorizations, waivers, temporary provisions that, at the time, had appeared procedural. Over a 7-year span, Noor's office had approved hundreds of minor administrative changes, buried in appendices and routine meeting records, individually justifiable, collectively revealing. 19 authorizations adjusted inspection protocols at logistics sites operating under municipal or humanitarian designation. 12 extended permissible storage durations. 8 reclassified shipments as time critical, eliminating secondary scrutiny. None mentioned drugs, none referenced weapons. All appeared compliant. When these records were layered over shipment data extracted from seized devices, the synchronization was exact. Access opened, cargo passed, access closed. One memorandum drew particular attention. 2 pages granting emergency access credentials to contractors supporting community infrastructure enhancements. Those credentials bypassed physical controls at 3 facilities. Within 48 hours, encrypted communications referenced open lanes and verified corridors. No coded slang, no theatrics, just confirmation. The precision unsettled senior personnel. This was not a street-level organization evolving upward. It was governance machinery repurposed from within. The Somali criminal networks connected to the case had not fought for territory. They had mastered administrative process. At 6:02 a.m., a follow-on team entered a warehouse registered as municipal overflow storage on the city's southern perimeter. The site had passed inspection repeatedly. Its electrical usage, however, exceeded baseline norms by 4-fold. Entry was uncontested. Inside, shelving units held sealed containers marked as medical inventory. Spot checks confirmed narcotics consistent with the 300 kilograms seized earlier. Packaging identifiers matched codes found on Noor's devices. The stock was incomplete. Most had already been distributed. Minutes later, a traffic unit monitoring a freight corridor reported an unscheduled departure attempt from a flagged facility. When officers initiated contact, the driver abandoned the vehicle and fled. He was detained 2 blocks away. The truck contained weapon components packed in the same configuration as those recovered from the office. The network was adjusting. At 6:27 a.m., digital forensics units detected coordinated access attempts across multiple encrypted servers tied to accounts found on seized hardware. Data deletion began in structured waves, not random, curated, executed like a checklist. Command ordered containment. By 6:41 a.m., the operation extended beyond city limits. ICE teams were tasked with locating individuals linked to Noor through shell entities registered across state jurisdictions. Financial crime units initiated freezes on accounts that, until that morning, had appeared unrelated. Transfers stalled mid-process. Balances locked in place. Automated compliance systems triggered faster than analysts could manually review. By 7:10 a.m., preliminary figures showed more than $38 million immobilized. Funds had circulated through nonprofits, advisory firms, and logistics contractors. None maintained staff. All issued invoices. Each invoice corresponded to an authorization memo. What troubled analysts most was the absence of reaction. No frantic calls, no attempts at negotiation, no visible panic. Communications that persisted after the arrest consisted of short acknowledgments. Confirmed, acknowledged, proceed to secondary. This was an architecture built to absorb disruption. At 7:33 a.m., a final detail sharpened the assessment. One document retrieved from the safe referenced an internal designation used exclusively within federal inspection databases. Not publicly accessible, not contractor-facing. Knowledge an external actors should never have possessed. The implication was unavoidable. Access had not been penetrated, it had been granted. At 7:33 a.m., one final detail brought everything into focus. Among the materials recovered from the safe was a reference to an internal identifier used exclusively inside federal inspection systems. It was not public-facing. It was not a contractor marker. It was knowledge that should have been inaccessible to anyone outside the oversight chain. The realization settled slowly, then completely. Access had not been taken. It had been provided. As the morning progressed and the city slipped fully into daylight, federal teams across multiple jurisdictions prepared to re-engage. The initial arrest had peeled back the outer layer. What followed would determine how deep the structure ran. The network had never been designed to disappear. It had been designed to appear compliant. At 8:04 a.m., the language of command shifted. What began as a limited federal action transitioned into synchronized disruption. The instruction moved through secured channels without explanation or debate. None was required. The point of no return had already passed. Move on all remaining targets. Immediate execution. Across the state, vehicles departed staging areas without lights. Helicopters rose into the pale winter sky, their presence muted by distance and altitude. Tactical elements converged on sites that shared no visible connection on official records. Municipal depots, leasing offices, temporary storage facilities authorized under emergency clauses that had quietly outlived their purpose. The first coordinated entry struck a freight consolidation hub near a river port. Officially, it processed surplus equipment transfers. Functionally, it served as a sorting center. Agents breached from two directions and met resistance at once. Uncoordinated, improvised. Two individuals attempted to hold a narrow corridor with automatic fire, shooting blindly from behind, cover they assumed would slow the advance. It did not. Flashbangs ended the exchange within seconds. Both suspects were secured alive. No federal personnel were injured. Inside, agents discovered more than anticipated. Crates marked as mechanical components, concealed weapon parts sealed in oil and vacuum packaging. Serial numbers removed. Manufacturing signatures untouched. At a second location, a logistics office tucked inside an unremarkable commercial park, agents encountered a different scene. Shredders were still warm. Hard drives sat submerged in chemical solvent. Someone had been directed to erase evidence, not escape. That distinction mattered. Digital specialists recovered what they could regardless. Backup fragments, cached directories, time-stamped access records showing exactly who accessed which systems and when. The deletions had begun less than 30 minutes after Noor was detained. The system had been monitoring events in real time. By 9:12 a.m., ICE teams confirmed the detention of 3 additional individuals, connected through shell entities flagged earlier in the morning, each identified as an administrator. None could articulate the actual function of their companies. All had received consistent payments routed through identical financial pathways. Financial containment intensified. Accounts were frozen at multiple institutions. Transfers stalled mid-process. Automated fraud detection systems flagged transactions that had previously cleared without scrutiny. The volume overwhelmed compliance units. Analysts watched balances lock one by one as liquidity drained from the network. At 9:47 a.m., the first explicit response surfaced. An evidence transport vehicle leaving a secondary site slowed abruptly when debris appeared in its path. As the driver adjusted, another vehicle moved in to obstruct the rear. The maneuver was crude, poorly timed, not a trained ambush, an interruption. Agents responded immediately. The blocking vehicle reversed and fled. No shots were exchanged, no pursuit followed. The signal was not operational. It was psychological. Minutes later, intelligence units intercepted communications referencing risk exposure and material compromise. The messages avoided names, avoided places. They referenced procedures. The concern was not detentions. It was the seizure, the documents. At 10:21 a.m., forensic confirmation reframed the entire operation. Several memoranda taken from the safe were traced back to internal audit pathways used to pre-authorize inspection exemptions. These systems were inaccessible through public portals. They required credentials assigned to federal or state oversight personnel. Access had come from inside. The network had not forced entry into protected systems. It had been welcomed. As site security operations continued, resistance shifted again. Not through force, through process. Phone calls, emergency filings, legal motions submitted within hours of the first arrest, alleging procedural violations and jurisdictional overreach. The documents were refined, pre-written, waiting for the moment they would be needed. Federal counsel had anticipated the move. Warrants were amended, seizure authority expanded. Judges approved the actions without delay. The confrontation was no longer about raids. It was about who controlled the rules. Federal legal teams were ready for the pushback. Warrants were amended in real time. Asset seizure authority widened. Judges authorized the expansions without hesitation. By midday, entries had been made at more than 20 separate locations. Weapons recovered exceeded initial projections. Additional narcotics seized from secondary sites increased the total volume. Servers were removed while transactions were still live. Evidence was indexed and secured faster than challenges could be assembled. Veteran agents did not describe the operation as disorder. They described it as revelation. A framework dependent on habit and velocity was breaking down once attention slowed it. Routine collapsed under inspection. As noon neared, a shared assessment settled across every active briefing room. This operation had never been about transporting drugs or stockpiling weapons alone. Its primary commodity was authorization. And once permissions are granted, they carry a reach far greater than contraband. By late afternoon, visible movement decreased, but pressure remained constant. Final search elements returned with sealed containers and cloned storage arrays. Evidence rooms filled systematically. Every item logged, no acknowledgments issued, no sense of completion. The operation had not ended. It had reached equilibrium. After nightfall, analysts initiated the next phase. They ignored the narcotics. They bypassed the weapons. Those quantities were measurable and finite. Instead, they focused on the paperwork, the approvals, the procedural exceptions that had quietly altered the mechanics of oversight. Page by page, they reconstructed a structure that had never depended on secrecy. It had depended on compliance. The recovered files outlined an access chain extending far beyond Noor's office. Inspection windows compressed under emergency authority. Secondary reviews waived due to staffing reallocations. Entire facilities reclassified to bypass routine audits. Each decision appeared minor in isolation. Together, they created transit corridors invisible to enforcement. The consequences were no longer abstract. Public health metrics surfaced first. Counties aligned with identified transit routes showed sharp increases in overdose admissions during the previous winter quarter. Emergency departments reported shortages. Response times degraded. Ambulances lined up before dawn. Analysts matched timelines. The correlation was precise. Approvals preceded spikes. Seizures preceded decline. What had been optimized inside spreadsheets had arrived as emergency. Weapons analysis followed. Components seized from auxiliary caches matched firearms tied to unresolved violent incidents across multiple states. Ballistic signatures aligned through shared machining characteristics. The recovered tonnage was not excess stock. It was supply. The quiet that followed proved more unsettling than resistance ever had. Media attention flickered briefly, then receded. Coverage narrowed to procedural notices. Names were withheld. Context postponed. Editors cited verification standards. Producers waited for confirmations that never came. Subsequent internal audits revealed a pattern of contracted briefings and advisory relationships that encouraged caution without explicit instruction. No censorship directive existed. Restraint had simply been applied repeatedly in the same direction. Inside a secure facility, Noor sat alone at a metal table. No cameras, no legal advisors. Investigators arranged the inventory without commentary. 300 kilograms of narcotics, 1 metric ton of weapons, digital records, access logs, original documents never meant to leave controlled environments. He did not dispute the totals. The case continued to widen. Subpoenas expanded. Oversight bodies launched internal reviews. Committees convened emergency sessions. Each response addressed process, not origin. One question remained absent from public discussion, yet explicit in internal assessments. How had this structure operated undisturbed for so long? The answer was not complex. It was ordinary. Each participant fulfilled a limited role. Efficiency was rewarded, exceptions normalized, verification postponed. The system had not collapsed under assault. It had eroded through cooperation. When the final warrants were served, there was no celebration. Only inventory. Only reconciliation. Careers concluded quietly. Programs were suspended. Directives rewritten. What failed was not a single network. It was a belief. That authority guarantees integrity. That order prevents misuse. That oversight functions automatically. This case left a harsher conclusion. Systems do not defend themselves. They move what they are instructed to move. And when permissions are abused, the damage arrives disguised as routine. If you believe public office should never protect criminal structures, remain engaged. Oversight exists only when people refuse to avert their eyes.